go a little on a little travel here. So the circled area is where you see Greece. It's right next to our first Dairy World Tour. Italy is sticking out that little boot, and then right there to the right is Greece, that little peninsula sticking out of Western Europe there. Next slide. And this is what the country of Greece looks like. It's actually mainland plus almost 3,000 islands, depending on how you categorize an island. About 225 of them are inhabited, but there are a lot of islands in Greece. And so you think about the Greek Isles, that's what you're, if you get a chance to island hop, which we're going to do today, you might go to the Cyclades, which is a group of islands. They're circled right in the middle. There's about 200 islands themselves, small ones, along with 20 larger ones, some that you might have heard of, like Mykonos and Santorini, right there at the bottom of the screen. We're also going to island hop today to Hydra, which is right south of Athens. And then we're also going to go over to IKARIA and AEGINA, also south of Athens there. So we're going to hop right around to visit several of those islands today. Okay, next slide. So the country of Greece was started out with a group of city-states way back in the 8th century BC. They were already organized back at that time. And then in about the 4th century BC, Philip of Macedonia and then his son Alexander the Great brought them all together and conquered much of what was the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. And so that's what helped spread part of Greek culture around the world. And then as we heard in our first Italian World Tour, it was the Romans that conquered Greece in the 2nd century BC. And what was surprising about that conqueror is that Greece was so amazing, and some of the Greek culture and literature and democracy and customs, that the Romans actually adopted several of the things that of the people that they conquered. So because the Holy Roman Empire was so giant, it was able to, Greek culture and cuisine was actually able to spread throughout the Holy Roman Empire, which covered much of the settled world at that time. All right, next slide. All right, this is the Parthenon, probably the most famous landmark in Greece. That is Melina's son right there in the front. And it is in Athens, of course. And what's so interesting is that the most famous landmark of Greece is Athens. Well, is in Athens, which is a city, which in itself is very beautiful. But much of the architecture in Athens, the old architecture has been restored, and most of the city is built post World War II. But there are a few remaining landmarks there. So if you go, make sure you see, obviously, the Parthenon, which is located on the hill, which is the Acropolis. And then there's a temple to Zeus there. There's also several very beautiful Greek Orthodox churches that go back quite a ways that you would definitely want to see as well. But most of the rest of the city is pretty modern. But if you go to some islands, next slide, please, you're going to see more older buildings that have remained. But this slide is very typical what the country of Greece looks like. It's very mountainous. In fact, 80% of Greece is mountainous. And that's why it's so interesting that about 4% of the country's GDP comes from agriculture, and even more amazing that they can produce so many delicious foods and foods of the Mediterranean in Greece. So Greece is actually the #1 producer of pistachios in the EU. They are second for rice and olives, and they are the 3rd largest producer of figs, almonds, tomatoes, and watermelon. And of course, you might recognize many of those being a foundation of the Mediterranean diet, especially olives. People around the Mediterranean region eat olives and olive oil, but actually the olive fruit almost every day and almost at every meal. All right, next slide, please. So this is also a very typical scene in Greece. This is on the island of Hydra, and this is obviously a beautiful coastline. Greece itself has 9,400 miles of beautiful coastlands. And this one, obviously you can see some of the boats and the fishing boats, and then the beautiful sloping coastline there with the buildings built on there. That is what much of the coastline looks like. And it's in these beautiful, in the harbors and on the coastlines that obviously seafood is harvested, and Greeks eat a lot of seafood, but especially small fishes. So we might recognize anchovies and sardines, but there's also tons of local small fishes that are very, a big part of the Greek diet is those small fishes, which is interesting because that is now what experts are recommending, is to try to eat some of those smaller fishes, which are made more sustainable, but Greeks have been doing that for a very, very long time. All right, next slide, please. All right, here I am on the island of Santorini, and it's very famous for its whitewashed buildings, which you can see in the background there. All right, next slide. And also the island is famous for being a caldera, which is a big round circle there, which is the top of a blown off volcano. So it was an underwater mountain that basically blew its top about in the time of Exodus. So it's got a round caldera there that it provides a very nice harbor for cruise ships to come into. So if you've ever gone on a Mediterranean cruise, you've probably stopped in, which I guess not very many of you have, but you should. But you can see when you're on Santorini, you see the cruise ships docked out there. And it also, of course, provides amazing harbors for fishing as well. But it's also beautiful volcanic soil. And so a lot of the things that grow there on Santorini benefit from that volcanic soil. And it's actually still a live volcano as well. All right, next slide. This is also what Santorini is famous for, these beautiful whitewashed buildings with the blue domed roofs like that. And you can see that how the island sort of goes around to the left of your slide. It follows out there. At the very end is the town of APHAIA. And my husband and I actually walked from this town here, which is Fira, all along the tippy top of the ridges there down to the sunsets. And that's one of the most famous things to do on the island, is to watch the sunset from the town of APHAIA. But you can also see as you're walking along there, it's a long walk, it's very hot, but you can see part of the cuisine there. You can see the tomatoes growing, you can see the amazing vineyards with the wines that are produced right there on the island and benefit from that volcanic soil. You can also see people out gathering herbs and foraging for herbs, some wild fennel and other ones that grow along there. All right, next slide. So Santorini is very famous for its Santorini tomatoes. They are everywhere. They were in the most delicious sandwich that I've ever had in my whole life. It was a falafel sandwich. So of course, falafel is fried chickpea balls that are normally green from all the herbs and parsley that are in them. But these chickpea balls or falafel on Santorini were actually red because they had a lot of Santorini tomatoes in there. It was served wrapped up in a phyllo dough with some creamy tzatziki sauce, and it had even more tomatoes in it, and it was so good. But this is a picture of the Santorini salad. So most of you are probably familiar with a Greek salad, which would be tomatoes and peppers, onions, olives, and feta cheese, and cucumbers. But on Santorini, they add their signature caper berries and caper leaves, which grow wild there and are also foraged and then pickled. And the reason why the Santorini tomatoes are so famous is because, again, of that volcanic soil. They're high in acid and high in carbohydrates or sugar. So it's that yummy, sweet, tart balance of flavors that makes food so delicious, that we'll talk about a little bit more later, is that yummy acid that makes everything taste so good. All right, next slide, please. Now we're hopping over to the island of IKARIA. So this is a very isolated island. You may remember from the very first slide that it was way over on the right-hand side of your screen, sort of all by itself. And IKARIA is known to be a blue zone. And one of the reasons it is a blue zone is because it is so isolated, and the people there have been able to maintain their food traditions and the foods that their ancestors have eaten for many, many years and lived to be 100. So there's more in blue zones across the world. There's more people who live to 100 than other places around the world. So researchers have studied, why do they live so long? And not only do they live long, but they're very, very healthy and have low risk of, have low incidence of disease as they're at those older ages. Next slide. So what do the Ikarians eat? They eat a rather short list of lots of very nutritious foods. First being feta cheese, black-eyed peas, split peas, fava beans, lemons, foraged greens. You often see people out foraging for greens on IKARIA. It's just what people do. They're all throughout the year. There's different ones that come up. And on a side note, one of the best places for us to forage for greens might be in your garden. I know right now I have 2 lovely greens that are growing in my garden that are wild and super high in nutrition, being dandelion greens, yay, and purslane. So look that one up. It's sort of a succulent and it has a yummy lemon flavor. So that's a fun one to look at. And I know it grows in Montana, so I'm sure that it grows in Idaho and probably Utah too. Also potatoes. People on the whole of Greece eat a lot of potatoes. They actually eat more potatoes than Americans. They eat around 55 kilograms a year of potatoes, and Americans only eat 52 kilograms of potatoes a year. Ikarians also eat herbs, lots and lots of wild herbs, sage, rosemary, mint, marjoram, and a lot of times they drink that in herbal teas, especially in the morning. So starting the day out with herbal tea, which is high in antioxidants and other benefits. Also coffee and local honey. They often use that honey to sweeten their tea in the morning. All right, next slide. And then this is the island of SPETSES, and that was, again, sort of right south of Athens. And this is a beautiful picture of a Greek Orthodox church. And this particular one is the chapel to the patron saint of SPETSES. So each island has their own patron saint, and this is the one to the island of SPETSES. And what's so interesting is the Greek Orthodox Church has actually been the one to help sort of shape Greek identity in the modern times and help transmit a lot of those Greek food traditions throughout the world. So anytime that the people immigrated to other parts of the world, they brought their Greek traditions of food, especially around high holy holidays, from Christmas, Easter, and other holidays around the world, and transferred those to the areas they are. And if you do go to Greece, one of the very best things to pick up while you're there, one of the very best souvenirs, are all of the handmade icons. I have one here. Several of them are just absolutely beautiful, and you can still find them made by local artists. So there I'm leaving you with a little souvenir of what to take on your travels, and I will transfer the slide control over to Melina.
Hi everybody, welcome, kalos ήρθατε. Today, welcome to my Greek kitchen here in New Jersey. I wish you were all in Greece with me. I can't believe that most of you have not even been there yet. So I'm working on a plan for all of us to get there together. You should all travel with me. I guarantee you it's going to be the trip of a lifetime, for sure. This is the beautiful island of SPETSES. It is found in the Saronic Gulf off of Greece. This is the furthest island in the Saronic Gulf. The Saronic Gulf is very close to Athens. There are no airports. The only means of transportation to get to these islands are via ferry or taking a road trip along the Peloponnesian coast and water taxiing over. There are no cars on these islands. You can get around by foot, horse and buggy. Idra, you can get around by donkey. And there are a couple taxis, local taxis, but other than that, motorcycle or by foot is definitely means of transportation. This picture that you're seeing right now is actually a true farm to table restaurant on the highest point of SPETSES. It is owned by the largest hotel, the Poseidon Grand, the Poseidon Grand Hotel. They do all kinds of hands-on cooking classes up there and fabulous dinners and lunches and brunches. And from this farm, they actually feed the whole hotel. So breakfasts, you know, the eggs all come from this farm. They make their own cheeses from the goats that are on this farm, and all the herbs and vegetables are all harvested right here on this bostani in the mountain. SPETSES actually played a really important role back in the day. It was had a very large naval history, was very, very strong. It had a shipping wealth, played a part in fighting with the Ottoman Empire. Actually, they were one of the first people during that war to raise their flag, pretty much symbolizing resistance to the war. The flag was actually raised at the Church of St. Nicholas, which is today the patron saint of the island. And he is actually the saint who watches over the sailors and anybody at sea. So it has a very significant meaning with that patron saint. So if you want to go to the next slide now, we'll talk about a little bit about the island of AEGINA. AEGINA is one of the closest islands to Athens. It's only a 40-minute ferry ride. And this is actually the temple of APHAIA. I'll talk about it in a few minutes. The island, it has a very mythological and a nice little chunk of history in it as well. Its actually name came from a nymph. The nymph was known to have been carried away by Zeus, and he brought her here to hide her on this island. She gave birth to a son, and the son, in contribution, named the island after his mother, AEGINA. So it has a nice little twist to it. And then APHAIA came in years later. Apparently, she was a goddess that was being attacked, and the stories change quite often, so I'm not sure which one, but one story saying that it was an angry gods that were after her, and another story said that it was sailors that were giving her grief by the shore, and another goddess came, swooped her, and she fled up to the mountain and just disappeared. And in her honor, this temple of APHAIA came about. So it's still there. It's beautiful. If you ever get to Athens, you can do this in a day trip and visit. And Serena was talking also about the pistachios, how they have come from Greece. Well, it is actually AEGINA that is the main staple of pistachios throughout Greece. The soil is very chalky. It's a very dry climate, and they don't get a lot of water. They get a lot of breeze from the Mediterranean, from the sea, and that helps actually pollinate the fruit. So the pistachio is actually a smaller nut. It's kind of pinkish on the inside, and it's actually got a really sweet taste. So it's quite different than the pistachios you've seen here. Another little bit about AEGINA too, they actually were one of the first for minting the first coins in Greece. So they did play a good part there. And they also developed the first standard of weights and measurements that actually were used all throughout Greece. So that's my little story about AEGINA.